Hello. Before you start this episode of The Game Changers, I wanted to take a moment to tell you about our new documentary, Abbey Ward, A Bump in the Road, which explores the challenges faced by professional female athletes and all working mothers. It follows the remarkable journey of an England rugby player as she battles back to the professional game just 17 weeks after the birth of her baby, and then on to secure her place in England's Six Nations squad for 2024. The documentary is free to watch in the UK on ITVX or globally on Rugby Pass TV. And don't forget that our other documentary, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport, is still available to watch on Netflix in the UK. Now it's time for the Game Changers. Hello and welcome to the Game Changers podcast, where we hear from the trailblazers in women's sport. I'm your host, Sue Anstiss, and before I get started, I'd just like to thank Sport England, who kindly support the Game Changers through a National Lottery Award. We've got a slightly different format for this episode of the podcast, as we're talking to a panel of Game Changers around a specific topic. There's been much talk about women's sports kits recently, from issues around Wimbledon whites, girls forced to wear skorts for PE, and women not allowed to wear the hijab to play sport, through to the extremes of female athletes objectified and sexualised with revealing clothing, high-cut leotards and bikini bottoms. I was thrilled to welcome my expert panel for this session, where we explored sports kit for women and girls, addressing some of the challenges and providing practical recommendations that will enable more choice for more women. My guests for this podcast were Rimla Akhtar, former chair of the Muslim Women's Sports Foundation and the first Muslim woman to sit on the Football Association's council. Rimla was also awarded an OBE for her contribution to equality and diversity in sport. Wendy Taylor, who leads on girls' work at the Youth Sport Trust, including the hugely successful Girls Active initiative, which is delivered in partnership with This Girl Can and Women in Sport. Tess Howard, a GB hockey player whose team won gold at the Commonwealth Games this summer. Tess is a real sports kit activist, helping to change the guidelines to make sports policy more inclusive. And Holly Bradshaw, an Olympian who's been very publicly outspoken about the challenges facing female track and field athletes. To kick off our conversation, I asked each of my guests why this subject was one they were so passionate about, starting with Wendy Taylor.
First and foremost, I'm a mum of a 12-year-old daughter, so I kind of see and feel and kind of are living that experience with her. Secondly, I'm a former PE teacher myself, so again, I've been in school and had those direct experiences working with girls. And more recently, obviously, sort of the last 19 years, worked at the Youth Sport Trust, really working hard to look at how we engage girls and maximise their participation and ensure that they have a voice in PE and school sport, and kit is one of those issues that could go a long way to addressing some of those challenges that we experience and girls experience.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thanks, Wendy. And Tess, in terms of your involvement, why the fire is burning in you in terms of this topic area?
I've been fascinated by how barriers are created for girls in sport on the basis of sex, on the basis of religion and gender. And I think if we can create a space where there aren't those barriers for girls to be able to experience the purpose of sport, then that is the world that I want to live in. That's why I'm so passionate about it. My dissertation was school sports uniforms, practical, professional, or patriarchal. And unfortunately, it's the latter that so often comes up. And I want to live in a world where they are practical and they encourage confidence and comfort in sport for girls so that they can experience the purpose of sport.
Thank you. Thanks, Tess. Holly, in terms of your involvement, I know it's been quite a personal relationship yourself in terms of kit and the response to kit. So can you share some of that with us?
Yeah, so as a young athlete, 18, 19 years old, I faced a lot of abuse online about the way I looked. Typically in athletics, you wear crop top with shorts, crop top and knickers, and I was very comfortable at that age wearing that, but there's no shying away from, I did have a bit of puppy fat and, that was okay for me, but not for a lot of other people who said I was unattractive, it was unprofessional, and really, really, abused me on social media. And that's created, I think, probably a lifelong kind of issue for me mentally. And it only really has come up recently in the last couple, 2-3 years, where I like to cover my body up because of the abuse I face. I'm very self-conscious. There's been times in my career over the last couple of years I've, having to go out my way, try and kick up a fuss to get an outfit that allows me to feel comfortable and I'm able to cover it up. And that's why I'm very passionate about it, because if I'm feeling like this, how many other girls are out there feeling the same thing?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk more about kind of specific instances too. And then Rimla, from your perspective, and again, we've spoken, you were a fabulous guest on a previous episode of The Game Changers, but perhaps share from your perspective why this matters so much.
Yeah, as everyone else has said, this is so personal. I think first and foremost, growing up playing sports, and I think someone who chose to cover, as I hit my teenage years, for religious reasons, it was something that I had to navigate, wearing sweat tops and tracksuit bottoms whilst everyone else is in skirts and vests. And it's so personal. But I think throughout my time with the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation, actually really not just focusing on Muslim women, but the principle of the fact that women should be able to choose what they want to wear when they're playing sports. That principle was something that I've kind of carried with me throughout my time. I mean, I'm sure we'll touch on this a little bit later, but kind of fighting the hijab bans, the sports governing bodies, international federations have put into place that have stopped women from participating. That injustice, that sense of injustice that comes with it is really real. And therefore it is a fire that burns within me. It's something I'm even right now working on. So it's a shame that, I've been in the kind of sports administration side of things for the last 15 years and we're still dealing with the same issues.
Yeah, thank you. And I noticed you said bans there, that it's not the one, we talk a bit about the football ban, but actually it's progressed through, and we'll come on to that in a moment. And there's so much to go at, but let's initially, if we can start with, to talk about schools, I guess, where it all begins in terms of schools and the kit and clothing that girls are wearing in schools for PE. So I wonder, Wendy, can I start with you? Because that's very much your specialist subject, isn't it? But are things changing? And I guess I'm also keen to know, if girls are given choice, if they had the choice, what do you feel they would wear? And what else should we be considering when it comes to clothing for PE?
I guess the starting point is, given the vast number of schools that there are in within the education system, it's a really mixed picture, and there certainly is not consistency across the whole of the landscape. What I hear is, regularly is examples of both extremes. Actually, when schools have done that really well, what that looks like, it looks like, girls are at the centre of that decision making. They're consulted, they're empowered to make choices and really have input into what they would like to wear during PE, and that there's an element of choice, because I think that for us all, we could all choose an outfit to wear of an evening, and I'm sure we would all choose something different. But ultimately, if we want to maximise participation for all our young people, that really has to be, choice and focused on feeling comfortable. And that's going to really increase engagement, enjoyment, and remove some of those barriers. So, we've got examples where, schools will have a range of items that could be a skort, it could be leggings, it could be joggers, it could be shorts. And all of those are entirely appropriate for girls to be able to participate fully in the way they want to. I think when we begin to hit challenges, and, some of that we've absolutely seen on return from COVID, when schools have come back, young people come back into schools, actually real reluctance from girls to go back into the changing rooms to get change, because they feel on show, they feel embarrassed, they're worried about, for a variety of issues, and kit exacerbates those problems. So I think really focusing on young people and their needs and having choices is integral.
I think choice is so important in all these areas, and giving girls the chance to actively contribute to that decision making. Tess, I guess, what are your findings in terms of both the dissertation and the work that you've done since in hockey?
Yeah, my dissertation ended with understanding what girls wanted. I asked over 400 women what would they have wanted at school, and it all came down to choice, but everyone is different. But what was really interesting is that it's like realistic choice, because saying that you have both boys' shorts and skorts, well, girls aren't going to want to choose the boys' shorts because that is not a genuine choice. So I think what we're seeing is that there needs to be a greater spectrum of items on offer, but also from suppliers that will be financially viable. So often what you get is in general school uniform as well is girls' shirts being specially tailor-made by a school provider and boys' shirts being a fraction of the cost from a wider supplier. So there are all these different layers, but it comes down to realistic choice. And I had a little experiment at Marlow Hockey Club last year where I coached with the under 12 girls. I said to them, our first thing is you can wear whatever you want. You don't have to wear Marlow kit, which is a fitted shirt and a skort. I said, you can come in whatever you like. Some girls were like, can I come in my pajamas? I was like, do you know what? If that makes you play well, come in your pajamas. So they came in all different outfits. And to begin, for the first week, people were still sort of wearing the normal kit. And as they saw other people break the mold and wear, jazzy shorts or leggings, then more and more started to feel comfortable to be able to make those decisions for themselves. And what I saw was girls feeling autonomous over their bodies, over how they looked, and then it enabled them to feel more confident on the pitch. So that was like a little social experiment that I thought was quite successful in giving agency to the young girls. So when I think of school uniforms in schools now, I think of what is rigorously inclusive. What is going to make those girls feel like they have choice? And that is when you have genuine choice.
Oh, I love that. Rigorously inclusive. That'll be a catchphrase we'll be using later. I like that very much, Tess. Thank you. And I think that's a challenge, isn't it? Is it around cost and uniformity and schools wanting that regularity? What have you found, Holly, in terms of kind of wider sporting kit for girls, especially at that school age and the teenage years?
I don't know whether it was to do with social media, but at school, we wore shorts and a t-shirt. I didn't think too much about it. But for me now, I see so many people at the gym wearing knee-length shorts. They wear leggings, 3/4 leggings. And even myself, if I'm having a self-conscious day and I usually wear baggy shorts, I'll put leggings on because I don't want to have my whole leg out because I'm feeling a bit iffy about my body. And I feel like just having, like everyone said, the choices at school will just make people feel comfortable. And I can think back to a couple of my friends at school who absolutely hated PE. They did not want to wear shorts. So they would just pretend they've forgotten their kit or whatever, not to do it. And that's such a huge barrier that doesn't need to be there to get people active. And I think the more choices we can have, and like you say, girl shorts, not just boys' shorts, so they kind of feel like they have autonomy over their body is super important. And you see it at the gym. And if we could just spill that over into schools, I think it'd make a massive, massive difference.
Thank you. And Rimla, in terms of schools and British schools at the moment, what's the situation there for girls that may want to remain covered in terms of their religious beliefs?
Yeah, I think it depends. It does vary from school to school, isn't it? As Wendy was saying earlier on. And I think those that are kind of, that they recognise they have a majority particular faith or they have a particular ethnic majority in their school, they are very eager and keen to try and cater to the needs of those women and girls. And so you do get some places where absolutely, the kit is, colours wise or a general sense of the principles of what you need to be wearing, that might be dictated, but actually what it physically looks like, that isn't dictated. There's a guideline in terms of if you choose to cover, then these are the options that you have. And I think you can still have that uniformity, you just have it in a slightly different way, and it's possible. That's what it shows. And I think just outside of the school space, it's the same with sports. And I think the point that Tess was making around the girls seeing other girls start to wear clothes that are different, that are, reflective of themselves, and that encouraging them to also take that step forward is really important. So we've seen as more and more women from different backgrounds are going into different sports and showing, for example, wearing the hijab or covering or wearing shorts instead of a skirt or wherever it might be, that's encouraging more girls to also say, this is a sport for me, this is something I can do. And it's so massive. So it's the same for the girls that are at school. And actually the schools should learn from the sports being played at the elite level in terms of what's possible there. And similarly for other women and girls to come into the elite sports space, it's just as important.
Thank you, Rimla. And I do feel, Wendy, I feel like it's a long time we've been having this conversation. Some of us have been around a very long time, haven't they? But in terms of some of the Nike research, it must be over a decade, 15 years ago, of knowing that girls want to wear something different in sport. So what is it that prevents that? Is it the money, that it's too expensive to offer different options? Is it the need to have girls conform because that's what schools do in terms of uniform policy and the colour of your hair? And what do you think is the biggest barrier that stops it being something that it seems so obvious that we know it should be available?
I think for some schools, there just doesn't seem to be that issue. So Rimla just talking about hijabs, and there's a school in Manchester recently who was saying that actually they've supported the school by buying a big stock of hijabs, and then the girls are buying them back at cost. So there's they're covering costs, but there's so it's really reducing that barrier. It's made a massive impact in terms of kind of how girls feel coming to PE. Schools are, I guess, trying to walk that line between, managing kind of cost of living, increased prices. There's also guidance from DFE now that's, recently been introduced that sets out the expectations around, uniform, but actually that it shouldn't be particular brands, so it doesn't kind of further deter students. And actually there is a bit more flexibility. But from our perspective, that when we speak to schools and they certainly overwhelmingly see the kind of the views of girls, that's something that then, once they open that conversation, they then are in a position where they want to work with the girls and actually, hearing their voices and acting upon that to work with them. But as Tess has shared, some of the practicalities around brands or, sort of making it financially viable, I guess, to offer a range is a challenge. But I think it's just, for us, our responsibility to kind of keep moving that conversation forward, keep raising that and around the potential of the impact that it will have on their subject and engagement of their learners and, the lifelong benefits that hopefully we all want to see for girls.
Tess, could you go ahead there?
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to add, I think a lot of the issue in private schools is around tradition. It's quite funny because when I was doing my dissertation, I was just so angry at so many different stages. But the main stage was when I read the school guidance for uniforms, which says schools must not discriminate based on sex, race, religion, gender, as per the UK Equalities Act 2010. Directly beneath it says schools can decide if girls can wear trousers or not. And that was just sorry, is that contradiction or is that contradiction? There is still this pervasive narrative within schools that is tradition is fine, and so it doesn't matter what really the impact of that is. So my school I've been working with, I went to private school in Cambridge, and they've just introduced girls' shorts into their curriculum, and that is changing a traditional school's viewpoint. But hopefully what will happen is that as that school plays against other schools, they will see that it's actually not that big of a deal when a girl wears shorts. Adjacent to that is how policies can support. So what we've just done in England hockey this year is change the legislation so that it doesn't matter what girl or boy wears, the whole team doesn't have to wear the same thing. So that is a huge change. So hopefully I'll be one of the first Premier League hockey players to wear shorts, though the shorts have not been made yet. But at least the policy allows it to now. But that means that there is genuine choice, and that would come back to genuine choices when you can wear whatever in your team and still be fine. So I just wanted to add that to Wendy.
Absolutely. Is that at all levels, or we see that internationally in terms of that choice?
The conversations are happening now with specialist sports who responded really well to our asking. So myself and Anna Toman, part of the England hockey team, went to Adidas and said, first of all, we need a better tank tops, because they were called compression tank tops. That's not the most enjoyable thing to wear, compression tank top. So we've changed our tops, and we're on a crusade to go and try and change the score rule. So watch this space, I guess.
Fascinating. But you heard it here first. Fascinating. Thank you, Tess, for that. I'd like to move on, if I can, to talk a little bit about white clothing in sport. And again, it's something that I do feel in the last few months, last year almost, it's been talked about more than perhaps it has in the past. And again, coming back to that taboo of not talking about the one thing that affects almost half the population, but periods, menstruation, we don't discuss it. But there was much more talk around Wimbledon this year in terms of the women playing in whites. And I was interested in watching the Rugby World Cup out in New Zealand. I wasn't in New Zealand, but watching it on television this weekend, and that so many of the home nations, so the Scottish and the English team were playing in white shorts. So those rugby girls playing in white shorts at a national level, and how that then impacts girls playing in team sports in white shorts. So I'm just wondering, in terms of your thoughts on how much of an issue you feel that is for girls. I don't know who would like to take that one first, but just kind of interested to have your thoughts on, I feel it's an issue, a mother of 3 daughters, but how much of an issue you feel that is in terms of another barrier to girls taking part in sport. Wendy, did you want to jump in there? You waved your hand.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, I guess kind of our ongoing research that we do each year annually through Girls Active. So just looking at the stats from the past few years in terms of girls' participation and the barriers they tell us. So periods has gone from being the sort of third barrier to the biggest barrier to their participation. So of the 6,000 plus girls that we surveyed this last academic year, 39% of them told us that, when they have their period, that stops them participating. So we know how much of an issue that is for girls in the PE space. I think if you then overlay that with having to wear a kit that you feel on show uncomfortable, among the top concerns were concerns about leaking, having low self-confidence, self-consciousness in the changing rooms, and the worry that others will know when they're on their period. So it's a huge issue.
And why has that gone up, do you think? Why has it gone from third to the most prevalent?
I mean, I think there's that increasing awareness of, feeling self-conscious in your body among teens. I think probably COVID hasn't helped that situation as well. And, general happiness around how girls feel with the way that their body looks has also kind of, sort of declined. So only 33% of girls told us that they're happy with the way their body looks. That's 67% that aren't. That's massive. And, kit is one aspect that can really make that difference. And, when we ask girls, what is the top thing that actually schools could do to help make a difference? Better options for PE kit was the number one thing. It does tell us we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah.
So whilst I'm excited because I can hear, lots of positive change from schools and the way that they're working with girls through that, we've got a long way to go in terms of getting that consistency across schools.
And in terms of whites, Tess, I don't know, was that something that was flagged at all, or is that different in terms of the research that you've done? Or
it was a huge part of it. Yeah. One part of the research was around what made girls drop out of sport. And yeah, as Wendy has said, whites is a huge issue. We actually had an internal team survey sent out last year before the Euros, GB hockey team survey that said, would you like to wear a white skort at the Euros? We chose red and blue skorts, which was a really good show of, what democracy can do.
I'm half keeping an eye on questions in my Q&A if I can, but one interesting point there is who makes a decision in schools about what's worn? Is that completely down to school? Do they have their autonomy to choose what girls wear for PE, or is that?
Yeah, I think from, certainly in terms of DFE guidance, schools don't have to have a uniform, a school uniform. They don't have to have a PE kit. However, it is definitely strongly advocated in terms of the DFE guidance that I was reading. So, and I think there is also a lot that, schools want to do by having a uniform in terms of creating the sense of belonging, having a school ethos, to also reduce some of those experiences that maybe single out individuals. So actually having that sense of community is important, and obviously therefore PE kit is naturally an extension of that. But governors and school leaders, along with heads of department, I guess would have that ultimate say in terms of who makes that decision. But equally, governors, parents have a voice within that, as do young people, hopefully increasingly from our perspective.
Excellent. No, yes, indeed. And another comment made in terms of athletes as activists themselves and showing the way. And I'm always conscious that some athletes just want to be brilliant athletes. We don't all need to inspire the next generation. It's fabulous that female athletes do, but they should also be able to just be fabulous athletes. But Holly, I wonder from your perspective, clearly you have been very vocal and outspoken around issues around kit. It's obviously got easier because you're older, and I guess because you're an experienced athlete, not older, you're an experienced athlete, but also that you're in a sport where there isn't selection. So you're in a sport where you jump really high, and therefore, you've got your qualification, haven't you? Rather than being, we talked a little bit earlier around some of the girls in some of the team sports or rugby or football, where they might not want to say, I'm not comfortable in white shorts, because it might impact how people feel towards them too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there is still that in athletics. If you look at our WCP selection, there isn't just a criteria of if you jump this, you get on. That very much is the case for the Olympics and the Worlds and whatever. But in many scenarios, there might be 4 or 5 athletes that can only go down to 3 spots. So I definitely feel like a lot of athletes are scared to talk out or say their own opinions, not only through the selection, but also, I don't know whether, I'm sure it's like this in a lot of sports, but as soon as the media, cotton onto anything, these really negative, bad headlines come out. And I've spoken to a lot of my friends in the sport, and they're almost like at their wits' end with it. They're like, I'm just not going to say anything because they're all going to take it out of context and I'm going to become the bad guy. And it's definitely happened to me. When I spoke out originally about the kit, there was quite a few negative headlines that had twisted my words, and that's definitely not the angle that I was coming from. So I definitely feel like there is a barrier, but for me, I've kind of achieved everything I would have ever dreamt of in this sport. So now I kind of feel like I'm a flag bearer for raising these issues, and I'm going to talk out and share my opinions, because I really, really want to help others. And I just really don't want to see young athletes go through what I did and drop out of the sport, because it's way more likely these days with, the negativity around social media. So I just feel very passionate about that.
Thank you. And I know, Rimla, when you opened there, you were talking about choice, that ultimately that's the thing, isn't it? I think I remember seeing a little bit of the backlash you got, Holly, and I felt a bit guilty because that was our conversation in the Telegraph, wasn't it? But some of that negativity, but ultimately it's about women doing and girls wearing what they want to wear. So kind of choice is the important thing here, isn't it?
I actually find it incredible that we're talking about this in many ways. I mean, it's great that we are, but I find it incredible that we are, because even Wendy's talked about there in terms of the guidelines that are there. They're guidelines, right? They're not rules that you must have this and you must have that. And it's the same really for international federations that dictate the rules, kind of in the elite side of things. Tess talked about tradition. We're talking about historic stuff that's been there. And, it's that sense that I've always had in the sort of sports industry in particular, where you've got people just saying, you'll ask a question about anything, whether it's kids or something else. Oh, but we've always done it this way. And you kind of go, well, why? Why? What is the reason for this? Is there a legitimate reason for us doing it this way? Is there a legitimate reason for us having this particular kit? And if you had a blank sheet of paper, is this what you'd do? If you knew no other way, is this what you would do? And I just don't think we would. Whether it's to do with whites, you mentioned Maggie, for example, coming into Lewis, and kind of one of the first things she did was to say, well, we're renewing the kit, get rid of the white shorts. It's as simple as that. The only areas that need to be considered are fairness and safety, really, from a sporting perspective. And I think about swimming, for example. So part of my work with kind of kit has been around bikinis, and obviously, I forget which games it was, but I think it was the Sydney ones, maybe 2000, 2004, something like that, where you had swimmers wearing full body streamlined kit, and that was giving them competitive advantage, right? So that's where FINA came in and said, right, we're going to limit how much of your body you can cover. So I get that from a competitiveness perspective and a fairness perspective, but the bikini is not going to give you a competitive advantage, and it's going to drag, if anything. So, there are ways to come around this. So one of the things that I worked on with Swim England, as they're now known, was amateur swimming competitions and allowing the bikini into there, because we had, at the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation, we had women and girls and their parents coming to us and saying, I would love to compete. I would love to go on that pathway of competition, but I can't because the person that's laying down the rules is telling me I can't. So we changed that. But actually trying to get that to FINA level is even more, it's just difficult, because people don't want to even go there to consider it, because of their own kind of preconceptions and their historic kind of way of looking at things. And this is where I think the manufacturers of kit come in, and they're so important. So with FINA, can you imagine if Speedo and other kind of Nike and others come forward and say, well, actually, we've done some R&D, we found something that covers someone's body if they choose to cover, but doesn't give them competitive advantage over what you're saying is allowed. If that were possible, then why would FINA say no? And the same with Nike and the Euros this summer. You know, the white shorts were already there. Nike had decided that the white shorts were what the women's team were going to wear. And the players like Beth Mead and others were saying, well, actually, we don't want to wear these, but we're going to have to wait now till the next set. And there they are for this tournament that's going to go across the world. They've won the tournament and they're not feeling comfortable within themselves because they're worried about wearing white shorts. It isn't right. We shouldn't have to talk about these things. We should just be acting.
It's so true, isn't it? There's a couple of questions coming in about whether it comes from the top or whether it is about people driving change from the bottom. And I think it's interesting. I had a fantastic email from a woman who was a chair of a rugby club, local rugby club, and was trying to get the shorts changed. The girls didn't want to play in white shorts. And someone on the council of her club was saying, well, the Red Roses play in white shorts. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough. So that was like the argument used against her. It's like, if it's good enough for the national team, it's good enough for our girls. And I'm really pleased and proud of how hard she worked to change it. And she did change it in the end. So that's such a key point, isn't it? When we then see those top international teams playing in kit, it's hard then for grassroots sports to not feel they have to emulate and follow that too. There's a lovely comment from Keith Lewis in the Q&A too, Rimla, which is, I just want to follow up with another point about rugby, about how good and inclusive rugby has been in terms of allowing the hijab and women to play and people to play in all kinds of kit. So what do you think in terms of the FIFA ban on the hijab as was, and now in other sports too? Where's the difference? Why is it okay in rugby, but it's not okay? Is there still a ban in basketball? There certainly was, wasn't there?
No, there was. So FIFA were the first ones to outright ban the hijab and any religious headgear in sport. But obviously the hijab took sort of the headlines, as it were, because it had such an immediate impact on millions of girls across the world. But as soon as FIFA, we managed to overturn the ban there, and all that hard work over 7 years to get that overturned, FIBA in their all their intelligence decided to initiate a ban in basketball, and actually devastated at least 2 women that I know that wanted to go professional and were good enough to go professional, absolutely. When FIBA put the ban in place, that's where I kind of got this sense of, for goodness sake, we're going to have to go through this again, this whole kind of challenging the ban. And we did overturn it again, largely due to Bilqis Abdul Qadir, who's this amazing basketballer, like I say, from America, who wanted to go professional. But there are so many other sports. I mean, it's great, Keith, that we've got the hijab in rugby that's allowed and specifically mentioned. I think, I'm guessing here, the fact that someone like Zainab, who plays rugby union, is in the sport, can advocate for that, helps along the way. What I would like is for the rules to just not be restrictive, so that if and when somebody from a different background, or a girl that chooses to dress in a different way, wants to enter a sport, she has the opportunity. She doesn't immediately come up with a barrier. And I guess from a religious headgear and the hijab ban's perspective, one of the things I'm currently trying to work on in my so-called spare time is really around working proactively with sports to look at their kits and say, how can you be more inclusive here? And specifically around the hijab, but just generally as well. How can we make sure that no other sport puts a ban in place, whether it's the hijab or the burkini, whatever it might be, that stops women from every background taking part? And I need some legal support with that, or someone that understands all this stuff. So if anyone wants to help out, please let me know. But that's what needs to be done in terms of action. We need to change the rules at the international federation level, because that is what trickles down right down to club level.
What you're doing is fantastic, Rimla. So yeah, power to you, and we'll spread the word for more support too there. And we know historically that women's sport's always been considered as more acceptable, isn't it? If we're dressing femininely, what we traditionally might have considered femininely, and wearing skirts and skorts and so on. So Tess, it's fantastic to hear about the work you're doing in hockey. What's general opinion in terms of that, of playing in dresses, and the same for netball?
There's such an interesting part. It's where my whole interest came from, was why do we still wear skorts, and why is that the legacy? And as soon as you understand why, you're immediately put off by what the reasons are. Acceptability in sport, as you said, for women has come from femininity. And you have to understand where femininity comes from. It's docility, it's submissiveness, it's to look a certain way. It's around physique, it's around appearance, behavior. So feminine itself, has so much baggage to it that it creates almost a paradox when you put it together with sport, which is traditionally the masculine. But then again, if you understand what masculine traditionally means, it means strong, powerful, dominant, aggressive, dare I say. And so when you have these two conflicting forces, that makes it very difficult for a woman to exist in this space. And that's called the athletic feminine identity paradox. And that is why there are so many tensions in sports so if you look at the way rugby and football were traditionally conceived of as women invading men's sports, whereas hockey and netball have been kind of, feminized by the skirt or the dress. So my big interest is, okay, now we're in the 21st century. Do we still need to feminize sports for us to be able to play them? And I ask these questions to my teammates. I say, why do we still wear skorts? And they say, well, we just look nicer. It's more professional. It's like, and I'm like, do you really think that? Or is that your social internalization of culture? And I think it is the latter, because no one grows up thinking it's a certain way unless you're told it's a certain way. That's socialization. So what I've been trying to understand is it practical, professional, or patriarchal, is where do our beliefs for the skort come from? And that's directly linked to what it means to be a certain gender. And that, in the academic term, is called cultural intelligibility. Can I understand that you are a female? Can I understand that you're a female playing sport and that is okay? So that's sort of the logic. You talk about the hyperfeminization and the objectification of women. That is to overemphasize, hyperfeminize a woman so that they are acceptable in that sport space. So I think that one day we'll get to a stage where you don't have to be overly feminized to be accepted in sport. And that's where I think uniform comes in. Because uniform itself, let's take the skirt, for example, or the dress, it itself is the paradox. It is saying that you can only play the sport as a woman if you wear this, because it shows that you're a woman so that you can play sport. So it's the complete circle paradox that's going on. So to sum up, if we do change policy and we do change practice, I think you can see some of these dominant narratives start to change.
I could talk to you forever, Tess. A whole new chapter in my book there on that topic too. But it is fascinating, isn't it? When you hear it kind of explained in that way, the historical impact that we still see today for those things. Like we worked a while ago with Harlequins rugby, actually, and we're going to do an April Fool, which was around the Game Changers event that they had, that we were going to design a skirt for them to play rugby in a skirt. We'd even had it mocked up with all the panels in the different colours. So we wanted to feminise rugby, attract more women to it, as hockey and netball had, to play in a skirt. And obviously it was quite laughable at the time, and the April Fool never went ahead for various reasons. But when I'm talking to schools and to others now, I often say, how would we feel if the Lionesses ran out in skirts? It would be laughable to almost change, to think about them running out of Wembley in floaty white skirts. But that's still okay for tennis and golf and netball and hockey and those sports too.
But here's the funny thing though, Sue. Everybody trains in shorts. I went on a massive Instagram stalk of Emma Raducanu because she plays in a skirt. Every single photo of her training on Instagram is in shorts. And there's never been a hockey player who's done a fitness test in a skort, because it is impractical. Here's where I think we can win. I think we drop it's gender discrimination, because clearly that's not going to work. So instead we go for what is performance enhancing. And this is how I started to get my teammates involved. I'm saying, what is going to make the difference? We're in the 40-degree heat in Tokyo. What is going to make the difference? It's not a lightweight skirt. It's no skirt at all. It's shorts. So I think if we go along the performance enhancing and comfort route, I think we can make a lot of progress.
Fantastic. Thank you. There's so much to unpack there, isn't there? In terms of, I guess, in schools and so on, Wendy, just restricting you to that area, but in terms of the attitude to to skorts. And I remember talking to a director of sport recently who said, actually, I talked to my girls in netball and they all love, the netball girls all love their dresses. My point was, well, that's lovely that they do. I'm more concerned about those that aren't in the netball team anymore, that have given up playing because they don't want to wear the dresses. So I guess that's often an answer we hear, is actually the women that are playing, love, as Tessa said, they love what they're playing in.
Yeah, it's not surprising when you look at schools that teachers teach to their strengths. They put on opportunities that are attractive for more students like themselves. And so role models and, actually having the right conversations with a range of girls that are representative of your school population, not just the girls that you see that come to you and talk to you, seeking out and having, those depths of conversations with a range of girls, because we know that there is a challenge for girls where they've got this constant struggle around what they see on social media, how they're meant to look, the feminine, and all of the selfie images that you see. And that clearly is that conflict with getting changed, and for all the reasons that Tess has outlined in terms of being competitive, getting hot and sweaty. And for many of those girls, that is a real challenge. And therefore, they don't want to kind of finish PE and then have to go to their next lesson hot and sweaty and feeling like, everything that they've done to make themselves feel who they are in their identity. So that there's got to be a way in which we create the right environment where girls feel safe, where they feel valued, and where they have that sense of belonging. Kit's one element to that, but actually also, how the activities on offer, how they're delivered, and hearing that actually, yes, we're going to make the changing rooms more a better environment for you. We're going to build in time where you've got, time to kind of make sure that, and nobody wants to shower in the secondary facilities. That's a whole different conversation around, actually the state of secondary PE facilities, because
that's a whole other podcast.
That's another podcast. But absolutely, I think it's building girls' confidence and helping them normalise that actually how you feel and the benefits of being active, and actually removing some of those inhibitions for them to make them see that that's a space they want to be in.
Thank you. And I'd like to move on if I can. I'm conscious I'm just trying to whistle through my topics. It's a big area, isn't it? But maybe a little bit more around a slightly murky area, really, but around women's sports clothing being designed to objectify women's bodies, which I guess is a build on from that femininity. What we've seen, anyone that saw the Norwegian beach handball, tiny bikinis last year, pictured next to the men's team in their shorts and so on, will understand the kind of challenges that we face. I don't know. It's a difficult topic, isn't it? Because we do want women to have choice. And I think Holly and I have had that conversation before too, that you want women to have, if women want to exhibit their bodies and they feel that's how they want to compete, then you want to allow them to do so. We don't want to be restrictive, but we want to have that choice too. So I don't know if any of you have got thoughts on, I guess, practical ways in which we can kind of change some of those beliefs and views moving forward in terms of that women playing in minimal kits, be it high-cut leotards, bikini bottoms and so on.
Yeah, I have talked about this a lot. And when the camera pans along the field of 12 girls out there, I'm the only one wearing what I wear. I have long shorts on to cover my thighs. I do not want to have my belly out on TV. And that's very unusual. But I think for starters, me being in that shows to people at home that this is an option to wear. I don't have to be, a lot of girls do feel comfortable wearing crop top, shorts, knickers. That's absolutely fine. But a lot of girls don't. So the fact that I have the option out there and girls are seeing that, I've had a lot of feedback as to how much of a positive thing that is. And I think it is a very difficult, like you said, a very difficult conversation or a topic to talk about. And when Tess was talking about the femininity in athletics, although we don't wear skorts or dresses or anything like that, there is a big range. And I almost feel like sport, especially in athletics, I'm not sure on others, has been lost in terms of, girls want to be out there and look great, but it's gone to the extremes of it's more of a fashion show. How kind of great and sexy can you look? Because that is what sells, and there's no getting away from that. But what isn't being rewarded is girls out there who are just out there because they want to do sport. They want to fling themselves over a pole. They want to run as fast as they can. They're sweaty, they're red-faced, they look terrible, but that's not what sport's about. It's the purity of of sport. And I think what you were just saying about in schools, and I would go to maths, I'd go to English, and I'd be sweating, I'd be red faced, because I'm one of those girls that I'll keep a red face for a good hour after I've played sport. And girls don't want to do that these days because of social media and the pressure to look good. And I think, the more it can be talked about, the more these barriers can be broken down, because it's just a terribly sad state of affairs, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree. And I think it is. There's a lot more we can see women being sweaty and enjoying sport in the way that men have over time. That definitely has to, have an impact, make a change there. Sorry, Wendy, did you want to say something then?
I was just going to add, really, and I think it's the responsibility of us all, really to see the person, to see the ability, and to talk about the performance and not how they look. And I think just, time and time again, you see it, you hear kind of the comments of, well, look what they're wearing, or their hair's strange, or whatever it might be. And that anything that detracts from, actually, this is a person that's participating to the best of their ability, or, for the maximum enjoyment. That's really what we really need to keep bringing it back to, and challenging everybody to do so.
Because if I can add, I say I'm watching football and, a male football player has mud everywhere, their hair's all over the show and they're sweating. Nobody would ever make a comment at all. But if I was out there playing football and I was in a tackle and my hair was all over the show, I had mud on my face and I was sweaty, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would have an opinion on, gosh, she looks like a right state out there. I'm 100% sure that happens. But that shouldn't happen. I don't understand why that still happens in today's society.
I think it just really does vary from sport to sport, like you say, Holly, because I remember Jodie Cunningham's podcast, actually, to give a shout out to your podcast again, Sue.
Thank you. Nicely done.
We've got the Rugby League World Cup coming up, just starting this weekend. We've got the men's, women's and the wheelchair all taking part at the same time, trying to give as much equality and kind of parity across the sports as it comes. But Jodie talks about in that podcast the fact that she loved it because she loved rugby league, because you could come as you are, right? You could come with whatever colour kit you wanted, ribbons in your hair, whatever it was, but you were still doing the same thing. You were tackling hard, you were running hard, you were getting muddy and dirty, and kind of that question of femininity just wasn't there. And what I would love to see, I think one of the best pictures for me that came from when the Olympics was with the Egyptian beach volleyball players and the German beach volleyball players in that match, that you had Dua, who was there with her hijab on, and her partner in the doubles match that doesn't wear the hijab but still covers the rest. So that there was the two of them, there was a difference there, but there was also that kind of difference between what was across the net and there. And the thing is, it was still about the sport. I think people made it about more than that in terms of the kit, but it was just about being competitive and enjoying the sporting spectacle that was there. So I think that actually media and the way this all gets covered is so important in terms of making sure. So for example, with the Norwegian women's beach handball team being fined for wearing shorts instead of bikinis, right? Ridiculous. But can we see the same outrage when girls are forced to not wear hijab or not allowed to cover? Because actually forcing women out of clothing is just as a good friend of mine and big sister, really, Shireen, says to me all the time, it's just as violent as forcing women into clothes. So for me, it's just, we need to, I think, really put the pressure on the media as well to start covering this properly. There's something here around brands, definitely. There's something here around media which can help put the pressure to create the change that we want to see. But I absolutely agree with what Tess was saying earlier on as well, that kind of framing it in the right way that athletes can get behind it. It's that little triangle that we've got right there of the athletes, media and the brands to create the pressure on the sports to make the changes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rimla. There's lots of interesting comments in the Q&A, but an interesting piece about unisex kit and the idea of having unisex kit. And I love that Charlie said unisex usually means it's just men's kit, but women have to wear it. That does tend to be what we mean by unisex. And I think we've seen that. I know there was a bit of an issue last year with the Harlequins big game with a women's rugby kit that looked like men's kit. So I think one of the athletes said, put some of the men in a women's size 14 and see how they feel about playing in unisex kit. So I think there have been issues there. I would like just to go round and get some kind of final thoughts from you, really, if I can do, as we're closing. But in terms of if there was one thing that you think could have the biggest impact, I would like us to take away, I think there's some really interesting things here in terms of the brands and, the impact that media can have on athletes too, in terms of driving that change and highlighting that change. But if either from this conversation or your own thoughts, if there was one thing that you would like to share that we could take away that you feel will have a biggest impact in this space. Wendy, I'm going to start with you again because I started with you at the beginning, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess for me, it is really, we need to keep championing that voice of, participants, whether that's girls in school, whether it's at all levels, and really need to kind of challenge leaders at whatever level that we're working with, and whether that's school leaders, whether that's, as Rimla's just said, the brands, media, keep profiling that and really kind of keep championing, as Holly and Tess are obviously doing such an amazing job of doing within their sport. I think one thing that I really would like to see a bit more conversation around it from a school's perspective as well is things like sports bras. And I know, again, that's probably another conversation, but actually, why have we not got sports bra as a recommended item on a kit list, PE kit list, for example? Too many girls running around really feeling uncomfortable yet again, and that's another element where we could make a big difference to how girls feel.
There's so much to cover. You got 4 points in there. Tess, what would your thoughts be?
So my thoughts are, policy takes a while to change. It's slow, but things on the ground can move really quickly, like what this Marlow hockey, you can wear whatever you want thing did. So the takeaway that I would give to those watching would be, if you have whoever you have you're in charge of, give them the choice there and then and see what happens. Make choice real. Make sure they feel safe, that they can actually express themselves. And if you do that, hopefully you will see that policy can then be changed afterwards. But real action starts from the ground. So I would open up with choice.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tess. Rimla, what would yours be?
The point that I made up front of choice is definitely there. Ultimately, it's about the user as far as I'm concerned. It's the same as any other area of life. It's about what the person wants. But I would just say, for those that are here on this webinar or watching back, it's, for me, just always question why. Just question why we're doing this the way that we're doing it. And it doesn't just apply to kits, because oftentimes you'll find that there's no real rational reason for it. And there is a better way to do it. So I would just say, question, in whatever your sphere of influence is, question why we're doing things the way that we're doing them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rimla. And no pressure, Holly, but over to you for the last point.
All the options have gone now. I would just, again, like we've touched on, ask brands and national governing bodies to just ask the athletes what they want. It's almost, I like the idea of more choices, but has anyone ever sat down with a group of shot putters and said, what is it that you want to wear? Because I bet it hasn't happened. And I'd just like to see a lot more of that from the brands and the governing bodies, rather than just choosing 4 options. These are your 4 options. What do you want to wear? I'd just like to see a bit more of that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. We're all going to go away and be more rigorously inclusive now. I'm going to use that lovely phrase, Tess. But thank you to Wendy, Tess, Rimla and Holly. I appreciate your time. So thank you all so much. I really hope you enjoyed that session as much as I did. What brilliant women they are. I'd love to hear your feedback on this format or on the Game Changers generally, so do get in touch on social media, where you'll find me on Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram at Sue Anstiss. Head over to fearlesswomen.co.uk to find out more about all of the incredible Game Changers I've spoken to for this and the previous series. As well as listening to all the podcasts on the website, you can find out more about The Collective, a free, inclusive community for all women working in sport. You can sign up for the Fearless Women newsletter, which highlights the developments in women's sport, and there's more about my book, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport. The Game Changers is completely free to listen to across all podcast platforms, so please give us a follow so you don't miss future episodes. And if you have time for a quick review or rating, we'd be so grateful, as it really helps us to reach new listeners. Thanks again to Sport England for backing the Game Changers through the National Lottery, and to Sam Walker at What Goes On Media, who does such a great job as our executive producer. Finally, thank you to my brilliant colleague, Kate Hannon, who does so much behind the scenes at Fearless Women. The Game Changers. Fearless Women in Sport.